Welcome back to episode 3 of Two Gay Dads. I'm Jason.
And I'm Nathan.
We are so glad that you're joining us this week, and we're happy that you're decided to be a part of the community we're trying to build. If you could do us all a favor, if you could like our social media pages, subscribe to us on YouTube, go ahead and follow us in the podcast. We're trying to build a community here, and you are a vital part and part of that community. So please follow along so you don't miss any of the opportunities you have to participate in our community. Nathan, what are we talking about on this week's episode?
This week, we're telling our adoption story, how our adoption story changed our lives and touched the lives of those around us. Also, this week in the Gay Agenda, we're going to be talking about using inclusive language as we begin together for the holidays, and what ignoring World AIDS Day says about the bigger picture of the Trump administration's craven attitude towards HIV, infection prevention, fighting AIDS, both here and around the world. This is Two Gay Dads. Let's get into it.
So Nate, this is episode 3. What have you learned so far in this process?
I think first, it takes a while to warm up, and then usually by the time I'm feeling really comfortable, the episode ends. And so then it all starts over again. I think the other piece is we do take this really seriously. There was part of this I didn't even anticipate. We put a lot of research and we try to get it right. We're going to get it wrong sometimes, but we're trying to get it right. We take that responsibility seriously. And so sometimes if it looks like we're reading a script or we're looking down, if you're watching us on YouTube or our voice hits that sounds like we're reading something, it's because we take this seriously and we want to make sure we're getting it as right as possible. What about you?
Well, I learned a couple of things. One, it's really important to make sure your husband's microphone is on, so we don't end up repeating segments. That happens, right? Again, we're learning, we're having fun with this. The other thing I've learned is the editing process takes about 3 times as long as actually recording it. So if it's a 45-minute episode to record, we're probably spending, close to 2 hours editing the episode. Maybe we'll get faster over time, but we also want to make sure we present something that looks good, that's and easy to listen to. And so, it has absolutely been a journey to start this podcast, and we're so glad that you're being patient with us while we learn.
Around, it's going to be fun.
I think one of the things as we get ready to tell our adoption story and our advice for whatever that's worth for the people listening out there, one thing that I think, Nate, you and I have realized is that adoption touches way more lives than you realize. Lizzy's adoption, right, has touched more lives than just the 3 of us that live in our home here in Michigan. And we're very proud of Lizzy and the fact that she's adopted. And when you share that with people, it's almost like they come out of the woodwork to tell you how adoption has impacted their lives. I mean, Nate, your father is adopted as well. And so, our families throughout history have been brought together, not by templates, not by what society has typically defined as a family, but families are defined and brought together by the common element of love. And we love our family and we love our child. And, that's our experience. Also, as part of our adoption story, there's a whole other person, Lizzy's birth mom, that she has a story too. And the stories of birth parents, the thousands of birth parents that exist out there, those stories matter too, because our birth mother chose to make us a family. She picked us, and we are forever grateful for the fact that she did.
So first, as you know, I'm the numbers guy, so I'm going to start with some interesting statistics. I pulled these from lifelong adoptions. Over 43% of same-sex couples have adopted or stepchildren versus about 10% of opposite-sex households. Same-sex couples are 4 times more likely than opposite-sex couples to have adopted children or stepchildren. And same-sex couples living with children are 8 times more likely to have foster children and 6 times more likely to be living with other relatives or non-relative children. And then just a couple more, LGBT adoptive parents are more likely to adopt transracially and special needs kids. And I think that's a really important conversation to be having. And then last one, 65,500 estimated children, adopted children, are living with lesbian or gay parents. 16,000 of those alone are in California.
Those are incredible numbers. We will link them below in the show description so that you can find that information for yourself. That's part of the work that we put in to produce this show every week that Nate was mentioning earlier. So, as we think about adoption and we think about all of the different ways we thought about surrogacy, we thought about foster to adopt, and we landed at private adoption for us. And there are all sorts of ways to make a family. So, Nate, why did we choose private adoption?
I think we always thought we were going, when we talked about, taking the leap of parenthood, we talked about all the different options. And for me, adoption made the most sense. My dad's adopted, but also because it's giving a home to a child who is already out there that was going to be born regardless. I just did not, for me, this is no judgment on people who choose surrogacy. I just didn't feel right bringing a child into a world where there are children in this world already who need loving homes. And we talked about foster to adopt. Bless those people that do that. They're special humans. I knew for me, and I think I've talked about this before, my heart couldn't take the potential, the more likelihood that you could have of reunification with birth families and losing your child. And so when we discussed it, we discussed what was right for our household and we chose private adoption.
So, what was the first step in our process, right? What was the very first thing we did?
You nagged me for like 10 years.
Well, that's true. I did.
And then one day, something just clicked. It was we were in Ohio with my sister. She was in childcare for 18 years. She had her childcare kids there, and this little kid jumped in my lap, and I thought it's just something in my head said, "I'm ready to do this." And so we literally got in a car. We were on our way into the grocery store to pick up some stuff, and I looked at Jason and said, "I think I'm ready to be a dad." And I think that he about jumped out of the car with giddiness to do a little jig in the middle of the highway.
Because now I get to tell the story that I made your dream came true because you came to me and said I was ready to be a dad. So a little revisionist there, but just a touch. One of the first things you have to do if you make the decision to adopt is pick an adoption agency. We worked with American Adoptions and they were phenomenal. There were some factors for us that mattered, and one of them was that they worked in 47 out of the 48 lower contiguous United States, which helps placements faster. We were not young parents, so we did not want to be in waiting. That was a factor that was important to us. It may not be important to other people. Other people have chosen more regionally or state-based adoption agencies. But figuring out and interviewing those agencies and finding an agency that works for you, that reflects your values and the family that you want to raise. Nate, would you have any other advice that we would want to give people about, picking an adoption agency?
I think for LGBT families, it can be, especially in certain states, can be somewhat fraught with making sure that you are 100% locked in, that you're like, this is not a cheap endeavor, right? And so making sure that your adoption agency meets your values, that they meet your, that they celebrate your family and your family creation. I know we looked at one adoption agency that we were fine with for our state. But once we started digging into their affiliates in other states, and this is like a national search, so everybody matters, we figured out that this was not the right match for us because certain affiliates in certain states did not support LGBT families. So according to the Court, apparently they're right, and so we decided not to go with an agency that might put up barriers to our family.
One thing I think I would suggest is most of these adoption agencies have a robust website, and on their website, there's usually a families in waiting section. And so, one of the things that we checked when we picked American Adoptions was we checked that families in waiting section, and however their website is built. I don't build websites for a living. They randomly pull all of the different profiles that they have, and so it's not always the same stagnant profiles on page one, and you find the LGBT people on page 10. It's random, but what we saw every single time was not just families that would look like ours, but families that represented the diversity that exists in our country. And so knowing that those are our values and knowing that there was that adoption agency shared our values was, one of the big selling points for us.
And then once you have an agency and you have done your call with them to start that process, you have to make two decisions, or you have to do two things pretty quickly. One is you have to learn to tell your story and create a adoption profile, which can be really challenging because we're just not used to doing that. And you have to fill out mountains of paperwork. And then one of the
Can
other
we just talk about the mountains of paperwork for
God.
a second? So the paperwork comes with this home study process, right? And so you have to find a social worker. Your adoption agency will do that. They come to your house. We were living in Virginia at the time, so she had to come to our house 3 times, right? And the one form that I don't think I'll ever forget filling it out, and I'm not sure if this was because we lived in the DC area, but again, this was in December of 2019, so it was about 6 years ago that our process started. We had to fill out a form that was our nuclear emergency preparedness plan. So in the event of a nuclear attack, what are we going to do?
I'd love to see some of these that the straight people who do not have to go through this process are filing. Oh, wait. Anyway, the other thing that we had to do was we had to decide what we were looking for as an adopted child. So you get this long form of just pages and pages of what drug use is acceptable and not acceptable, what race you get to, like it's crazy. It's like buying a car, but it's a child, and you're putting down all these
All
different
of the filters, like
all the
like think
filters,
of a
yeah.
checking a box on a website to like filter down. We didn't have very many check boxes.
And in the back of your mind, because you're thinking every time that I put a restriction on this, it reduces the chance that we match by just that amount. So it's intimidating. It's terrifying.
You know, as part of this process, this home study process with the social worker, they come to your house, and our social worker, lovely lady, right, helped us become a family. We were nervous, right? Who wouldn't be nervous when you have the woman who's going to determine whether or not you get to pursue your dream of being parents in your home? So Nate and I, we rush home from work early that day. Like I get on my hands and knees, I'm scrubbing baseboards, and Nate is making
He
one of
has
his
never scrubbed a baseboard a day in his life.
one time only. It was when it was the first time the social worker was coming, right? Nate makes outstanding charcuterie boards. If you've ever been to our house, you know that like that is one of his things. So we get make a charcuterie board. We get tea out, and our social worker comes to the door, open the door. Hi, how are you? He walks right past me down our hallway, looks at our dining room table where everything was set up, and says, "We'll meet here."
And you'll sit here. And she points at the other, and you will sit here. And then she sits down, looks at us, goes, I don't want any of that, and looks at Jason and says, What do you like about him?
There was no intro. There was no anything. It
There were
was
not a lot of
hardcore.
pleasantries.
No. So listen, she did her job, right? Which was help us become parents. She vetted us to make sure we were safe parents to adopt a child. So all of that was fantastic, but it does feel incredibly invasive when people are coming into every aspect of your life.
And from when talking to colleagues who've done international adoptions, which is a whole other adoption journey, and we are in no way, as we discuss this, comparing our journey to those are different stories entirely. We should probably have somebody on the show at some point to talk about it. Like on top of the mountain of paperwork that we had to fill out, there's an entire other mountain of paperwork and standards that you have to meet. And some of them are like, how close is your trash chute to your door? Like it's folks, when I tell you adoption is so complicated and difficult compared to when you just, when you think about your neighbor who can just go out and get pregnant. This is just some of the stuff. And I think it's important for people to know that, right? Because when we talk about adoption and foster care, making some of these processes easier is something that we should all be advocating for to, yes, keep children safe, but also unify them with adoptive families.
We were blessed with an incredibly huge support network from friends. We had to make this adoption video. Used to live on YouTube. I'm pretty sure it's hidden now on YouTube. Maybe we'll try to find it for you. We had to make this video. So we had friends who played in this video. We flew to Ohio to shoot scenes with other people's kids because our group of friends in DC, they thought we were crazy for wanting to be parents, and we were the only ones who were going through this journey and this process, but they couldn't have been more supportive. But one of my special places around the DC area is a incredible vineyard. If you ever find yourself out in Loudoun County, Virginia, it's called Zephaniah Farm Vineyard. The proprietors there have become dear friends of ours, and we needed a place outside of our apartment to write our story. to fill out the last piece of paperwork. And it turns out that it was incredibly important because our birth mom never saw the video, but she did see the story that we wrote. And so I text one of the owners and said, "Hey, would you mind if we came out? We need to get out of the house and do some serious writing." And they have a event space that was open. And so they allowed us to use this amazing event space, and they said, "It's yours. Help yourself to a bottle of wine if you need it. Trust you, just tell us what you drink, and you can pay for it later." And we sat there, and over a bottle of wine, we wrote the story that helped us become a family.
So then once you launch and we have been put out to everyone in the universe who's looking to adopt, then you wait
And you wait,
and you wait.
and you wait again.
And actually, we didn't have to wait that long.
No, our wait was pretty quick. Our whole process, actually, from starting the process to when we held our daughter, was about 9 months, which is, the time for a normal pregnancy. So it was, um, very quick for us. Nate, we had this trip to Asheville where we did a check in with our social worker.
Well, we were supposed to, so we were going to do a baby moon to Scotland, and I had spent months meticulously planning a trip, and then COVID happened. So that got canceled. And so we thought, well, if we can't make it to the Highlands of the Highlands, why don't we go to the Highlands of the United States? So we took a trip to the Biltmore in Asheville, North Carolina. And on our way down, we did a call with our agency. We're just a few months in, kind of where are we? What's going on? How are we feeling? Are we getting much traction? Do we need to make changes to our profile? And she was a little dodgy. And I don't think we processed it at the time, but after the
We
fact,
certainly
I remember kind of she was obfuscating a little bit. That's all that she would say. There was a lot of interest.
this to say the birth mom had already picked us, but the lawyers were talking in the background. It's always the lawyer's fault. Blame lawyers for everything. The world would be better off without them. Sorry to my best friend who's a lawyer, but
You married a litigation paralegal.
I know I did. But you don't do that anymore. You graduated. You got promoted in life. You got out of that cesspool. Anyways, we'd already been picked. And the lawyers were talking to make sure that our birth mother state and our state of Virginia were compatible and what that adoption would look like.
While we were on our trip, we were also doing some hiking, and we started, okay, 3 years was it. At 3 years, we had to completely renew everything. So we started talking about what are we going to do at the end of 3 years? We were going to spend the money and travel and do other things. So we had a plan for what if this doesn't work out, and we had interest.
But what happens when you tell God you have a plan?
A week goes by, and
He laughs at you.
I remember we were both working from home because it was in the middle of COVID, and Jason's phone rang.
It was July 29th.
I got that wrong in the last podcast because I said the 28th.
Well, we'll make mistakes. It was July 29th. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and my phone rings, and it's our adoption agency. And they tell us, "You've been picked." Like the words that every waiting family has been just, and she says, birth moms in labor.
In southern Mississippi, right across the bridge from New Orleans.
Which, ironically, during all of this time, because of the pandemic, Nathan and I had had conversations around what is the farthest west we will drive before we will get on an airplane in this pandemic? Because you're going to be gone for a couple of weeks. And ours was even beyond that because of the pandemic. And we said, what?
The Mississippi River.
And where was Lizzie born?
In a room that overlooked the Mississippi River. That is our kid.
That is absolutely our kid. So we are told that birth moms in labor, we have 1 hour to make this life altering decision about whether or not we're going to say yes to being Lizzie's parents. And you still have the notebook pages.
I do. They're in Lizzie's memory box, and it's so funny because as you're getting this news, you don't think about um, what are the details here, and it's like 4 pages in. I'm just scribbling notes, scribbling notes, scribbling notes, and then it says girl and white, which was irrelevant to us, but it was, and I just put the little box around us, and we moved on with the other notes. 1 hour to make a decision, 2 hours to get on the road.
and 17 documents to get notarized at 4 o'clock before you can leave during a pandemic. I mean, we went to, well, I won't say the name of a bank, but it's a big bank,
And pounded on the doors.
and pounded on the doors. It was like 4:02. I get it, like crazy people banging on doors. No, I'm not going to let you in. But we were desperate. Here's a fun fact: most UPS stores have notaries, and that's where we went.
It is. And, I'd also, I this is it's interesting because I put this in the notes because I just have this vivid memory of being on the phone with my boss. You were in the dining room on the phone with your boss, and I was in the nursery just with the bassinet and just cramming as much whatever my mind was firing at that moment into the bassinet. But we said yes, and we got in our car, and the song by Celine Dion, "We Drove All Night," has a completely different meaning in our household.
It sure does, because we drove all night to get to the first hospital that our birth mom was in. And when we talk about our story is not a story of heartbreak, it's not just because we didn't have disruptions. It's because in the middle of a pandemic, every person we encountered went out of their way to help us, to help our journey, and to make our process and our story easier and better. And so we get to the first hospital, and
First, I wanna pause there because I think this is a really you used a word that folks may not know, disruption. Disruption is when a adoption fails or is stopped. Very often it happens when the adoptive family is there in the hospital. Sometimes it'll happen completely outside of the hospital, happen, a couple months in, but a lot of disruptions also happen when they're there in the hospital. Terrifying because up until the paperwork is signed, that birth parent has the right to say, I don't want to do this anymore. And so you used the word disruption. I wanted to define that for folks because people may not know what that means. But imagine going and being there and waiting the bassinet in your car. And my mom actually talks about this. She said, we sent her a picture of our empty car seat driving south. And she looked at my dad and said, I pray that they come home and that car seat is not empty. And so it's a heartbreaking thing. There are a lot of parents go through or potential adoptive parents go through it, and it's terrible and it's sad. It is what it is, but we were blessed. We didn't have to experience that.
we were blessed. So when we get to this hospital in Slidell, Louisiana, it's COVID protocols. And so it's the birth parent and one other. And the social worker there was like, nope, you haven't met the birth mom. Both of you can come in. So we went in, having driven all night, and we got really good advice from our social worker on the drive down. And she said, you want to do what you can to build a connection to your birth mom. I mentioned earlier that our adoption is an open adoption, and our adoption agency only does open adoptions unless the birth parent opts out of it being an open adoption. And so,
Because it's better for the adoptive parent and the child.
yes, and it makes the adoption story a story of love, and you're so wanted that they chose to have you adopted so that you could have the better life. It centers the adoption story around what it truly is. It's around a child that is so loved that a birth parent is making a very difficult decision to let someone else raise their child because they're not in a position to do it. That is an act of love that I can't even begin to fathom. So it centers love around the adoption story. And so she said, go to the store and see if you can find something. So when we got down there, was a little before we could get to the hospital. We went to a Target and we bought this sloth that had mama sloth. I cannot remember what our birth mom chose to name the mama sloth, and it had a baby sloth who was named Max. Lizzie has never gone on a big trip without Max. Max has been to all of our work conferences when she comes with us. She's been from Michigan to DC. Max has been to Florida. Like, Max goes anywhere Lizzie goes, Max goes. And it's that connection point back to our birth mom.
Except for that one time when Max got left behind in the car and Daddy and Papa took him on a trip to wineries in Oregon, an adult trip, and Max got a little tipsy. So there's something to He's a little naughty, that Max. No, he's been a great companion for her. And we actually just did a visit with birth mom, and she still has. I'm trying to remember the name. It's in my phone notes of the big sloth. And chocolate. Because if you're in labor, like who doesn't want chocolate? Which she appreciated.
I would just say like that was really good, really sound advice that we got from our social worker, which was something that can make the birth mom feel connected to you as adoptive parents, but also still connected to the child that, up until this point, she's made the decision to that you're the parents, but she hasn't signed anything yet. And so everyone is taking a risk on each other here. And so finding ways to build that connection and build those relationships right away with the birth mom is critically important.
So then, through a series of events, we ended up getting moved to to New Orleans, to Ochsner Baptist, which, if you know your history of New Orleans at all, is the hospital from the movie. What is that movie where they
5 Days at Memorial.
Oh,
It's a
Days of Our Lives. That's Ochsner
series on
Baptist.
series on Apple TV.
And like any gay parent, when you hear Baptist, love my Baptists, but not quite sure if they were going to be LGBT friendly. Frantically searching on the internet, is Ochsner Baptist a LGBT friendly hospital? And they were. We could not have had a better experience. So we get down there, mom gets checked in, and Jason and I,
Go back to the hotel.
yeah, because we can't go in, so we're back at the hotel for the night, and then at
2:32 a.m. Central Standard Time on
July.
July, the day before my birthday, our kiddo was born.
Yes, she was. It woke me up in the middle of the night, and then we
They,
couldn't go
we couldn't
because it
go.
was COVID. They're like, "Go back to bed." Yeah, like that was gonna happen.
They said the social worker's not here right now, so they say you can't come till 9 a.m. So you just try to get some rest.
So what did we do? We went and we sat in the parking lot until we could go up and waited for the phone calls, because now there are social workers that are involved at the hospital is involved, our adoption agency is involved. So we're talking to all these people just sitting in the parking garage across the street from the hospital. Vivid memories of that. And then they tell us only one of us gets to go in. And at the time, it was only one of us for the entirety of the stay.
It wasn't just one per day. It was one person.
And she was early, so she was going into the NICU. So we didn't know how early. And so, as NICU parents may know, that could be a couple days, that could be a couple weeks. So only one of us is going to get to go. And I looked at Jason. I said, "You make decisions in our family a lot better than I do. You go." And I dropped him off at the front door of the hospital, and I drove around the block to a McDonald's, and I went and got lunch and then sat in the car and sobbed over my McDonald's. Because if you haven't sobbed over McDonald's, you haven't lived yet.
Or your kid hasn't driven you to that point yet, but don't worry, they will at some point.
That's a different sobbing over McDonald's.
It's a different sobbing from McDonald's, absolutely. So when I got to meet Lizzie, I was the birth our birth mom had not met Lizzie yet because she was early, and we still don't know how early she was, but she had all positive markers. At least that's what the NICU pediatrician said when he did his rounds. So I go into her room, and she's just tiny, right? She was little over 5 pounds, and she held this finger right here. You can't see that if you're listening, but on YouTube, you just saw the finger that she held for the first time, and I was instantly in love. And then the NICU nurse said, "Do you want to hold your daughter?" And so I held my baby girl in my arms, and I had been holding her for less than 5 minutes. And the charge nurse walked in and said, "Wait, I thought there were two dads. Where's the other one?" And the other nurse, the NICU nurse, said, "Well, COVID protocol said, that we could only allow one in." "Oh, no, 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 no. We're going to change that. Give me a minute." So then I'm stuck with like, well, what do I do? Like, I don't want to tell Nathan, like, turn around and come back, because what if they can't do anything? But they did. And so phones are not allowed phone calls are not allowed in the NICU. You can text. So I had to step out of the NICU, and I got to call Nathan, and I told him, "Hey, do you want to come meet your daughter?"
And I had just gotten back to the hotel, and I think I made like a 45-minute drive and 25 minutes. I don't think it shaved off that much.
It was less than 45
But
minutes.
I drove very fast and parked the car as quickly as possible, and I got to go up, and there was some confusion because of COVID protocols, and I got to go up and I got to meet my girl, and it was love at first sight, and, you never turn back. I was just thinking about just, like, little things that you remember, like the beeping of the, heart monitor because she was in a heart monitor and, sitting it was, COVID, so we got our masks on, we're sitting they would let us take off our masks as long as the curtains were pulled, um, and we, sitting there for hours and hours and hours watching, MSNBC on our phone and all that kinds of stuff. Just those like little things. And I think when a lot of parents look back, you look at the little things that you remember about when your kids are born. And then, we,
The oxygen meter was the big one.
yes, because if
Because
it dropped,
if it dropped, and I can't remember what the percentage was. I'd be making it up if I did. But the one thing that our pediatrician said is that the blood oxygen level couldn't go below whatever that point was. We had to have like 4 or 5 days consecutive without it below that before we could be discharged. Luckily, it never went below that, but I just remember staring at that number all the time.
I also this is an interesting thing about adoption. So you get to pick the name of your child. So she actually had a different name that she was born with that birth mom picked, and that can be a little like, how are they going to take? So she did ask us if we were going to keep the name, and we made the decision because it was right for us that we would go with the name that we chose, which is Elizabeth Addison, which is my middle name, Bruner Burns. And so that was it's just kind of an interesting thing, and that can be a really fraught conversation to have, especially because birth mom hasn't signed off yet. So this like up until this point, all of this can still go sideways for adoptive parents. And then do you remember we were just sitting there constantly talking to family, waiting. We knew that we have our attorney, they have an attorney that represents her. He was meeting her and she was going to sign the document that would surrender her rights. And we just waited and we waited and we waited, and it was longer than we expected. And then we got the call, and I think I just looked at Jason and said, "We just got the call. It's done. We're good." And we just the NICU nurses, bless them. She came in, scooped Lizzy up, and she just disappeared, and we just sat on the floor and sobbed together. So those little things.
It is the little things. Then for again, when you adopt a child, and if it's a from one state to another state, as ours was, when we left the hospital, when we were discharged after 5 days in the NICU, we had to go back to Mississippi. Our birth mom was a resident of Mississippi at the time. So it was a Mississippi to Virginia adoption. And we are now in this ICPC process. ICPC stands for the Interstate Child Placement Compact. And it's about how different states interact and essentially transfer jurisdiction over the adoption from the state of the birth parents to the state of the adoptive parents. And under good circumstances, normal times, they tell you that this process can take up to 2 weeks.
So yeah, when children are born, using very simplistic terms, they're wards of the state because they are parentless. We are not. You have basically what they will refer to as a glorified babysitting agreement, and so the other state has to accept that they will allow that agreement to come into their state. And you were talking to me about, I guess, if you adopt a native child, that it can actually be much longer because there's a whole other process on top of that, with other federal jurisdiction. 2 weeks was fantastic. We were ready for that. We went to we went to an Airbnb. It was in a beach town because we thought if we're going to be in Mississippi, we might as well be in a beach town. It was 1,000 degrees outside. Our Airbnb was crappy. It was
The air conditioner couldn't keep up. It was so hot. So it would get up to 80, mid 80s in this house during the day. In the evening, it might get down to a cool 75 to try to sleep. And we like to sleep cold. So and we were there for weeks.
Well, and I think that's a really important thing to note. Like, you don't know how long you're going to be in ICPC, so you're like, it's not as though you can have an Airbnb for a week to week with like first right of refusal, you basically book it for 3 weeks and put the money down. And you may leave 2 weeks in or a week in, and that money is just out the window. But that's how it works unless you're going to stay at a hotel or you have family in the area.
We
So
had a
it's
really lovely host. The house could have been better, but we had a really lovely host. And so before I booked it, I was messaging with them on the app and saying, this is, what I need to do. What happens if we need to leave early because we clear this process? And she couldn't have been nicer and said, if you get to go home earlier, you just let me know and we'll refund the days that you're not there
I was also thinking about this the other day. We had to get some documents notarized, and I remember finding a notary in the small town.
at a law firm.
And we went to this notary and we sat there and she did our documents and she walked out and she said, "Well, I was gonna charge you for the what they can charge you for when they do notarizing." And she goes, "But I wouldn't charge you guys. You're doing an amazing thing." So it's just like, again, like Jason said, all along the way, there's been these incredible NICU nurses who like NICU nurses, best parenting advice in the world. Like just sit down and talk to them. They showed us how to do all kinds of stuff because you go in blind. Like any parent, you go in blind. You just don't know. You can take all the classes you want. You're caring for a child. And on top of that, for us, it was a NICU child. So, but then we ended up leaving. We moved closer to the border, and into a hotel for the second week. And that's when things got a little hairy for us because we were kind of pushing to find out what's going on. And then we get notification that the judge that's assigned to our ICPC case in Mississippi wouldn't sign off because he was mulling over whether he wanted to hold a hearing. So now birth mom has severed rights, and the judge
And in Mississippi, when birth parents sever their rights, this is one of the things we learned through this process. It's irrevocable. So some states have when you sign the severing of your rights, there's a period by which the a birth parent could change their mind. That period doesn't exist in Mississippi. When that document is signed, it is irrevocable.
now this judge wants to potentially reopen this case. And thank goodness we work for a national advocacy organization and we were able to work with some folks that were able to not put pressure, that sounds kind of dirty, but were able to kind of move the case along and help us out a little bit with that.
I called my friend, my buddy Tyrone. Tyrone, if you're listening to this, huge shout out. Thank you for what you did. He made a few phone calls because he lived and worked in the state and was able to help get this case unstuck.
And so we got a call from our attorney. She said, "Get ready. We think it's going to come down." We waited, got everything ready, and then we got a call and she said, "Go home." And there's video of us walking out of the because it was like, "Daddy, where are we going?" Jason goes, "We're
Um,
going home." So, and now becomes this 19-hour trek home with a newborn.
who had to eat every 3 hours. We had to wake her up. They always say, don't wake a sleeping baby. We had to wake a sleeping baby because 3, 6, 9, 12 repeat was our feeding schedule for the first several months.
And, just really quick, and then we're gonna wrap up the story, but I remember we had a friend who, was just incredible. He lived in our building, and we called him and we said, "Hey, we gotta go. We're leaving. We got this adoption. Can you take care of our dog?" And without a question, he said, "Absolutely no problem." And when we came home, he was gonna meet us, and he dressed up to meet her because he wanted to make a good impression the first time he met Elizabeth. And, it's just, again, those sweet things that people, that happen throughout the process. We were blessed. We have been blessed.
And because we've been blessed, so is Lizzie. So, in wrapping up this story, a few things, just, closing notes. Understand the costs of what adoption is going to be between paying the social worker, the video that the birth mom never saw. Our adoption was a little over $60,000.
Which is right in the middle. The average cost range is $40,000 to $80,000, for adoption.
And so you need to understand that this is not an inexpensive process. And while, you know, Our story is amazing and filled with love and filled with people who, as we've shared along the way, went above and beyond to make it an exceptional experience for us. This is our story, and it is not reflective of all adoption stories. It is not reflective of the adoptive parents who have suffered one or two or multiple disruptions and have had their hearts broken time and time again, but have the stick to itiveness to see this process through to the end and finally get to have their dreams of being parents come true. So this is our story. This is one side of our story.
And like Jason mentioned before, we honor our birth mom and the sacrifice that she made, and we love her, and we do annual visits with her, or at least we try to. And she is still part of our life, and she's part of Lizzie's life, and she is tells us all the time that she made the right decision and we were the right parents. And darn it, we have to agree. But there are just a couple things. If you are looking to adopt, make sure that as you're looking at agencies, you're looking at making sure that they're transparent. What are the costs involved? Make sure that you have access to, if you have the funds, that you have access to them sometimes on a short turnaround. Our adoption is rare. There's a name for it, and I'm totally blanking on what it is, where it's like a surprise adoption, where we got a call when mom was in labor. Some adoptions start when mom finds out that she's pregnant and signs up, and so you got this like 7-month period. That
Our
was not ours.
our adoption agency had told us that in about 20% of their cases, you get the phone call when birth mom is in labor.
And we had to turn around and have that money in liquid form. And we're blessed because we have pensions, and so that allowed us to take a loan against our 401ks. Not everybody has that. So, like, when we talk on the broader scale, when you were talking about the, employer benefits, that doesn't it doesn't only affect how like people are living, but it also affects their family planning and the options that may be available to them in that environment. So we honor birth mom and all of those who have been part of our journey. It really does take a village. It takes a village to go through the adoption process. Jason has a great story he'll tell us some point about two couple friends, and only one of each of them was available, each couple, and so they pretended to be spouses on the video to get it going. To our friend that took care of our dog, to the NICU nurses, to the people who touch our lives to this day, every day, her educators, our friends, her caretakers. Thank you, thank you, thank you for what you do. It takes a village and you're part of ours, and we're honored to have you as part of it. So that's our story. How you feeling about that, Daddy?
We're sitting here and we're coming up on we're in the holiday season, and it's a good time to tell the story, to be reflective, to share how utterly blessed we are to have an employer that has the benefits that we have, who is filled with Lizzie's aunties who love and take care of her and surround her as role models of strong, independent women who are fierce advocates at a national level. We're blessed.
That's absolutely right. So this week in the gay agenda, I just wanted to start out with, the holidays are upon us and ensuring that we are using inclusive language as an act of love toward our colleagues, towards our friends, and especially our loved ones. Inclusive language isn't about restrictions, it's about expanding love and connection. Practicing gender neutral pronouns for cis friends and family is about creating a culture of respect, not perfection. So just, rather than brothers and sisters, using friends, using colleagues, using siblings, um, you know, using they and them is often, which we do a lot in our language, but just being respectful of as we're coming together for the holidays. So I just wanted to drop a note in. This season, let's give the gift of love that everyone is welcome because love isn't just about what we feel, it's about what we say.
Absolutely. And in our other part, because we've got a two-part gay agenda this week, there's been this push in America for us to be a more isolationist nation. Well, we did it last week when we stood by ourselves because we refused to recognize World AIDS Day. which is December 1st of every year. So imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out the world has stopped talking about the disease that killed your friends, your family, and members of your community. No headlines, no statements, just silence. That's what happened when the Trump administration chose not to recognize World AIDS Day. Last Monday was December 1st, and for the rest of the planet, it was World AIDS Day, a global day of remembrance and action since 1988. It honors lives lost, supports those living with HIV, and recommits us to ending the epidemic. This isn't just symbolic, it's a lifeline for awareness, funding, and solidarity.
Despite progress, HIV is far from over. At the end of 2024, over 41 million people worldwide live with HIV, and 630,000 of those die each year from AIDS related illnesses. In the US, tens of thousands are diagnosed annually, and stigma still keeps people from testing or treatment. World AIDS Day reminds us that science alone doesn't end epidemics. Visibility, education, and politics do. It's about saying, you are not forgotten.
And yet, for the first time in decades, the US government under the Trump administration chose not to officially recognize World AIDS Days. No proclamation, no social media, no public messaging. The State Department staff were even told to refrain from publicly promoting World AIDS Day on any of their assignments. And this is despite this isn't we're not trying to be a have an anti-Trump rant here because in his first term he called for a new initiative that established the Ending HIV Epidemic Initiative. And in this program, they were successful at reducing new infection rates in America's most infected jurisdictions by an astonishing 21%. So what's alarming about this is a break from a 40-year bipartisan tradition. It's a dangerous signal. It's silencing public health professionals, which is not natural. It causes harm and it undermines awareness, erodes trust, and risks reversing decades of progress.
And into communities that lose hope. The Trump administration already proposed deep cuts to HIV programs and halted global initiatives, leaving patients without medication and preventative services. These disruptions aren't temporary inconveniences. They create a chain reaction. Treatment interruptions lead to drug resistance. Drug resistance leads to higher transmission rates. Higher transmission rates lead to new infections and preventable deaths. United Nations AIDS warns that setbacks like these could erase decades of progress and cause millions of new infections in just 5 years. And those numbers are already going up. Silence doesn't just fail to help, it actively fuels the epidemic. And let's be clear, HIV is not just a medical issue, it's a social justice issue. When leadership chooses silence, it reinforces stigma, discrimination, and inequality. It tells people living with HIV that their lives matter less. That, friends, is unacceptable.
So World AIDS Day may have passed, but the fight didn't end on December 1st. If anything, this is when our work begins and is even more important. So here's what you can do today. Talk about it. Post about it on social media. Share facts. Break the silence. Support frontline organizations like the Elton John's AIDS Foundations, AMFAR, or your local LGBTQ community center if you're lucky enough to have one where you live. Push for policy changes, call your representatives, demand full funding for HIV programs and global health initiatives. And most importantly, fight the stigma every single day. Challenge misinformation and stand up for people living with HIV and AIDS because silence kills, but voices save lives. The Trump administration may have chosen silence, but we don't have to. Let's make sure this conversation doesn't end when the calendar flips. The future depends on it.
So next week, we are going.
Wait, did we just finish show 3?
I think we did.
3 shows in the books, and no one's died.
I think we might have yelled at each other a little bit along
Not
the
this
way.
week. We would never do that.
So next week, we will have an interview, our first guest, with a friend who's a single parent by choice, because we don't want to just talk about our family and what our family looks like, but other families that maybe don't fit into the traditional box.
And if you have a story that you want to tell, please send us a message on social media. send us an email. Go to our website. You can chat with us on our website. Send us a DM on Instagram, on Facebook, comment on YouTube. We want to hear your stories. The beauty of the community we're trying to build on this show is in you, and it is in the amazing love that creates families, all families, all families.
I want to ask you, what did you learn from Lizzy this week?
Well, Lizzy had her second snow day this week. And I learned, one, it's really hard to work from home when your kid is home from a school day because, especially when they're an only child, they want to play. But what she taught me today was the joy that it is just to make a snow angel with your kid in the front yard, because she drugged me outside. And you know what? The best 30 minutes of my day was when I stepped away from my computer and went outside and played with my kid in the snow.
We had great fluffy snow for snow angels today.
It was great fluffy snow. A foot of it, but great fluffy snow. What about you, Nate? What did Lizzy teach you this week?
Mine is those friends that get left behind. Lizzy's is her favorite blankie, whose name is Gucky. And when we talk about the villages, Gucky came to us from an older client of a cousin who's an electrician who was looking for somebody to give a girl blanket to because everybody in her life was having boys. And it just happened that she asked Jason's cousin at the right time, and he said, my cousin just had a little girl. So we got Gucky her favorite blankie. He has been drug across Connecticut Avenue in DC. He's the most well-traveled blanket. He did not get to go to wine country with
No, he stayed behind in Ohio.
Yes,
with your parents.
indeed. But Gucky's starting to spend more time down in her room. He's not getting brought upstairs as much. He's getting left behind. And it's just, there's a little piece of it that's like, she's changing so fast and she's growing up. Oh, and she lost her first tooth this week.
She sure did. She lost her first tooth. And by the way, playing the tooth fairy is real hard. That's a future topic.
Inflation
future
has hit hard for the tooth fairy.
Yeah, $5 a tooth. Ouch. Thank you all for joining us. Until next week, I'm Jason.
I'm Nathan.
Have a great week.